Welcome to the Living the Dream podcast with Curveball. If you believe, you can achieve. Welcome to the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, a show where I interview guests that teach, motivate, and inspire. Today, I am joined by author and leadership coach Erika Anderson, and she believes your best years might be ahead of you. So we're going to be talking to her about what she means by that and about her book, The New Old. So Erika, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely. Why don't you start this great conversation off by telling everybody a little bit about yourself?
Well, 35 years ago, I founded a company called Proteus International that still is going, and I mostly retired from it over the last couple of years, so it's being run by my partners. But our mission has always been to help our clients and their organizations clarify and then move toward their hoped for future. So, to get clear about the future they were trying to create for themselves, either as individuals or as an organization, and then to help them do that, create that life that they envision. And so, when I started to pull back and kind of semi-retire a couple of years ago, I realized that I wanted to write a new book about how to keep doing that in the third act of your life. And so that's how The New Old was born.
Okay, well, what do you mean when you say that aging magnificently is a choice?
I love that you picked out that line. So let me start a little farther back by saying why I called the book The New Old. So if you think about it, we human beings as a race historically don't have much experience of being old until, 100 years ago, most people didn't live past 60 or 65. In fact, 100 years ago, this is a piece of research that, a fact that I found out when I was writing the book. 100 years ago, only 1 in 20 people were over 60. And now 1 in 6 people are over 60. So being old is a common thing now, and it's never been before in the history of humanity. In fact, if you're a reasonably healthy 65-year-old person who doesn't smoke, you have about even odds of living to be 90. So all these people who are 70 and 80 and 90 and even 100, this has never existed before. And so what I mean about making that newly available third chapter of your life magnificent is, society's still kind of caught in this old model of thinking of human life as a couple of chapters and an epilogue. The first chapter is you grow up. The second chapter is you do what you do as an adult. You create a family, perhaps, or a business, or you do your grown-up stuff. And then you have a little epilogue, a few years where you just kind of drift into irrelevance and die. And that's just not true anymore. I mean, if you have this 20 or 30 or 40 years past when you are 60, and and you really think clearly about the kind of person you want to be as an old person and the kind of life you want to have, which is what I talk about in The New Old, you can make that wonderful. I mean, I was having lunch with, I'm in my mid 70s, and I was having lunch with some friends the other day, and I said, I really like being old. And this woman who just turned 60 was sitting next to me, she said, wait, really? I said, yeah, in some ways, it's the best part of my life so far, in a lot of ways. And I think that's just a new idea for us. So I want to get that idea really current. I want people to really understand that that's possible.
Absolutely. Can you talk about one of the three transformative principles in your book and explain how someone can apply that in their lives today?
Oh, I'd love to. So the three big principles in the book, the first one is be the boss of your life. Because a lot of times when people get older, especially if they retire from work, they start wondering what their purpose is. They can start to drift and feel sort of like, well, who am I? And do I have any kind of a vision for the future? And this is made worse by the fact that the ageism that exists in our society and almost all societies makes it so that older people, a lot of time, they get their agency taken away from them. Other people start making decisions for them, and people start assuming that you're not capable, that you're not smart, that you can't do things. And so it's really important, I think, as you get older to recognize that you can be the boss of your own life. You can craft a vision for the future you want to create. You can make a plan to keep moving toward that. You can build a crew of people around you, all the people around you to help you get there. So that's the first principle. The second principle is master your mindset, because it turns out that how you think about getting old and being old has a dramatic impact on both the quality and the quantity of your life. There was a wonderful study that was done by the Yale School of Public Health starting about 25 years ago. And they took about 700 older people, people between 50 and 80, and they asked them a bunch of questions to see what their attitude toward aging was. Like, for instance, there was one question, and they were all true false questions. There was one question that said, older people are less useful to society. So if you think that's true, you have a negative attitude about aging. If you think that's false, then you probably have a more positive attitude. Then they just divided this group of hundreds of people according to that. That one group of people who had generally more positive attitudes toward aging, and one group of people who had generally more negative attitudes. And they followed them for over 20 years, for 23 years. And they found out that, when everything else is sorted for, if you just look at that difference in mental outlook on aging, the people who had the more positive attitude lived on average 7.6 years longer. So it made more difference to their longevity than, quitting smoking, lowering their cholesterol, all the things that people try so hard to do. So that whole section of the book is how to manage your mindset, how to talk to yourself differently about things you may be negative about aging, about what's happening with your own life or your body. And then there's a chapter on mindfulness, how to just be present and aware, and a chapter on gratitude. So that whole section is about building mental skills that will help you to live longer and have a better quality of life. And then the third principle is get good at change. Because a lot of times younger people think that older people's lives don't change, that they're kind of stagnant and boring. But actually, when you get old, there's a lot of change. And often it's the kind of change that's the most difficult. It's change that's imposed upon you rather than your idea. You get ill, or somebody you love dies, or your children move away, all these big changes that you don't have any control over. So in that section, I talk about how you can, again, it goes back to mental attitude, how you can mentally be better, mentally and emotionally, at going through changes. And then I have a chapter called Modify Gracefully. And my example for that is pickleball instead of tennis. How do you see clearly when you may need to modify something in your life, either physically or mentally, as you get older? And then how do you do it? How do you do it gracefully instead of kicking and screaming so that you can continue to enjoy your life even if you have to do some things differently? And then the last chapter in that section about getting good at change is about learning. One of the really underutilized beauties and pleasures of older life is when you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, and usually your kids are grown, usually you're not working a 60-hour-a-week job, you have a lot more time and you can learn things. You can learn things that you may have always wanted to learn during your life, but didn't have time, didn't have the bandwidth. And so I talk in that chapter about how to learn. What's the best way to learn new things and to not feel embarrassed that you're 75 and you're sitting in a college class. So how do you learn and how do you feel good about learning? And then the very last chapter is about connection, because it's been shown that connection is hugely positive for everybody, but especially for older people. And the human connections often start to fray when you get old because of people dying or moving away, or you just have fewer connections. And as we get old, sometimes we don't think about making new connections. So I talk in that chapter about how to do it, how to make new friendships, new connections, new human connections as you get old. So that's it. That's the book.
All right. Well, I know that you learned Spanish in your 70s and you split your life between America and Spain. So how did that experience shape, your perspective on, what it could be like and all the things that you can do in your older years?
It's a wonderful question, and I think us moving mostly to Spain while I was writing this book, they have a lot to do with each other, because it's a way that I've been able to integrate and practice and incorporate everything I'm talking about in the book. I mean, now we live in the north of Spain, in a part of Spain called Asturias, and we're here 9 or 10 months a year. We go back to the States 2 or 3 times a year to visit our kids and grandkids and friends, but we're mostly here. And most people here don't speak English, so I needed to learn Spanish. I mean, I thought I needed to learn Spanish. There are people who live here who don't speak Spanish, but I think that would be very hard. And the wonderful thing is that it has made it possible for me to, attend open university classes and go to yoga class and make a lot of Spanish friends and learn so much about the culture here and the history and read books in Spanish. And so, when it comes to learning new things, I'm definitely practicing what I preach. But I see that living in this new place with all these new people and learning new things every day, it's it's just fun. And I'm not encouraging everybody to move to a different country, but I feel like too often when people get in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they start just settling into habits, and they start thinking that they can't build new habits or they can't learn new things. And learning in Spain has just shown me that my hypothesis, which is that it's possible to learn and experience and enjoy a lot of new things as you get older, is true. At least it's true for me, and I think it's more generally true. I think it's we have a much less limited capacity, a much more unlimited capacity to learn and grow throughout our lives, which is part of what can make this third act magnificent.
Well, you know that research on mindsets shows that a positive mindset can add 7 years to your life. So, what's one mindset shift that people can start doing right now to start living more magnificently?
Okay, yeah, let's get practical. So, I'm sure you know that we all talk to ourselves, that we all have this little internal monologue running along in our heads, right? And usually we're not aware of it. Our mind says things to us and it's kind of unconscious. We don't really listen to it. But sometimes those things that our internal voice, our internal monologue is saying to us are very negative. For instance, the things it says to us about aging, particularly our own aging. So, what I encourage people to do, just in general, but in the book, is to notice how you're talking to yourself. Just stop and kind of listen to that voice in your head and notice how you're talking to yourself about aging. Are you saying things like, oh, this sucks, or being old is terrible, or everything's downhill from here? And if you're saying things like that to yourself, the wonderful thing is you have the power to decide to speak differently to yourself. So, what I encourage people to do is take some negative thing that you're saying to yourself. Let's say you find yourself thinking it's all downhill from here. So, write that down, take a look at it, and then think to yourself, okay, what do I want to say instead? And it needs to be something I believe, or I'll just ignore myself. It needs to be something hopeful and that will hopefully trend me in a more positive direction, but believable. So you might just say to yourself something neutral. You might decide to say, Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if everything's downhill from here. Let me find out. And that will send you down the path of exploration rather than down the path of negativity. Because the problem is when you say those negative things to yourself, you tend to believe what you're saying. And so then it becomes a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you continue to say to yourself, yep, it's all downhill from here, then everything that happens that you think proves that true, you'll go, see, I told you everything's all downhill from here. And then it just negatively reinforces that belief. But if you decide every time you hear yourself say that, if you decide to say to yourself instead, no, no, wait, I'm not sure that's true. Let me find out, then that automatically puts you in a more neutral space. And you might even believe something more positive. You might even believe it if you say something like, yeah, some things might be harder, but there might be some things that are better. Let me figure out what those are. Right? So the whole point is when you hear yourself saying something negative to yourself, to find a neutral or positive, believable thing that you can say to yourself instead. It's kind of like talking back to yourself. And it's very powerful. It really works.
What can you tell us about any upcoming projects that you're working on that listeners need to be aware of?
Well, I'm doing a book event. If you're anywhere near New Paltz, New York, I'm going to be doing a book event on the 17th of August at 12:30. A little reading, a Q&A period, a book signing, and it's at a restaurant called The Cellars at RMV. You're welcome to come. I'd love to have people there. And then I'm sure there will be more book events scheduled, and you will be able to find them on my website, which is erikaanderson.com. And then I need to start thinking about my next book because if people keep reading my books, I will keep writing them.
Well, that was my next question to throw at your website. So close us out with some final thoughts. Maybe if that was something I forgot to talk about that you would like to touch on, or any final thoughts you have for the listeners.
Oh, that's great. I would just, if anyone who's listening is in the second half of their life, in their 60s especially, and you're thinking about retiring or you're thinking about what comes next, the one thing I would love to leave you with is that so much of how your life ends up being is in your hands. There are a lot of things that are out of your hands. The ultimate thing that is out of all of our hands, of course, is death. And, we can get sick, all those things can happen. But on a day-to-day basis, the quality of your life, how you feel, how you experience it, the connections you make, the things you see and do and find and learn, that is so much up to you. So I would really encourage your listeners not to believe that they have less power than they do over their lives. Our lives are much more in our hands than we often think. And you can make your life moment to moment, day to day, a really cool and interesting thing.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Erika Anderson. Please be sure to check out her book and visit her website and follow, rate, review, and share this episode to as many people as possible. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform and visit www.curveball337.com for more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast. Thank you for listening and supporting the show. And Erika, thank you for all that you do, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much. This was great. Wonderful questions. Thank you, Curtis.
For more information on the Living the Dream with Curveball podcast, visit www.curveball337.com. Until next time, keep living the dream.